The conversation that you're about to see between Will Powell and me was one of the most difficult conversations I've ever had. I was sat in a family home, Diane and Will Powell's home, and we discussed the circumstances of the death of their son 30 years ago now. The tragedy was completely avoidable, and what is quite unbelievable and unforgivable actually is that the family, Will and Diane, were not told the truth. I'd like to thank Will and Diane for being so strong together and keeping this going for 30 years. I had no idea that doctors had no legal obligation to tell you the truth when things go wrong. The case really outlines how Wales works, how things get covered up, how the rights of individuals are denied, how the rights of families are denied. What I did pledge, and I do pledge, to Will and Diane and all their supporters is that the Welsh National Party will always support them, and I will not rest politically until we have a Robbies Law in place. Diolch yn fawr. I'm sat here with Will Powell today. It's the 2nd of August 2020. That is significant because we're going to talk about something which happened on the 17th of April 1990. And Will here and his family is still waiting for justice. Will, it's I can't really think of a more difficult topic to discuss really than the death of your son on the 17th of April 1990, which was completely avoidable. So could you tell people out there watching this what actually happened?
Well, Robert was the youngest of our 3 sons, and he was 9 years old when he was rushed into hospital in Morriston, critically ill. Prior to that, he hadn't been ill, but he was dehydrated, he had abdominal pain, and he was vomiting. And I was actually playing darts that night because he was admitted at 10 o'clock, and I rushed to the hospital to be by his side. And when I got there, I cried because he was dehydrated. We were told that he just got there in time, meaning that he almost died, and we were devastated. Well, he was in hospital for 4 days. He was on a drip for 3 days. When my wife continually asked what was wrong with him, they initially told her the doctor would speak to us, and then the doctor did tell my wife it was gastroenteritis caused by a throat infection. What we didn't know at that time was they had suspected a condition called Addison's disease. Now, it's a treatable disease, but it invariably results in death without treatment. They also ordered Robbie to have an ACTH test, which is the test for Addison's. But at the time, we were not told about it and we knew nothing of it. Robbie was discharged, as I said, after 4 days. He was called back 5 weeks later, by which time he'd gained a stone in weight. And he was a different looking child. He looked well. So my wife took him down, not knowing it was for the ACTH test. The paediatrician decided not to do the test, but also decided not to tell my wife about the test or about the suspicion of Addison's. So as far as we were concerned, Robert had gastroenteritis caused by a throat infection, and it had come and gone, because it's not something that would be repeated unless it was a different infection. So Robbie was fine for 3 months, and in the beginning of April became unwell again. So because of the shock that I'd had 4 months earlier when I cried over his bed, something I never ever will forget that day either, I decided to take him down to the health centre to see a GP. He was actually seen by the GP that had come to this house 4 months earlier at 10 o'clock in the night and admitted Robbie to hospital in a blue light. So I reminded him that he'd done that. He examined Robert, said he couldn't find anything wrong with him, but decided he didn't even bother to look into the medical records.
Right, yeah.
So we were sent home being told there's nothing wrong with him. So what happened then is when I come home, I had to go out and I left Robbie in the house. But when I come home, he was out at the patio playing a little bit. I said, "You're a lot better now, boy, so the doctor must be right. You're going to school tomorrow." So he was sent to school the next day, which was the Tuesday. But on the 5th, he was sent home from school because he was unwell. And the school teacher had recognised that. And she'd even said subsequently they'd an oriental colour. Now that's pigmentation of the skin caused by Addison's disease.
Right, yeah.
So he came home and I thought, right, spoke to Diane. I said, "I'm going to take him back down to the health centre tomorrow," which was the 6th. So he'd seen on the 2nd of April.
Yeah.
Sent home from school on the 5th. I take him to the health centre again on the 6th. I'm seen by a lady doctor.
Yeah.
And she said she could find nothing wrong with him, even though he'd been sent home from school and he wasn't well. But unfortunately, Addison's disease presents, beg your pardon, fake symptoms.
Yeah.
And that's one of the most difficult things about it. So she couldn't work out what these symptoms were, and she chose not to look in the medical records, because had she done so, she'd have done that Addison's was suspected.
Yeah.
So she sent us home, and I told Dan we'd just keep an eye on him. It'll be fine. Well, he started to deteriorate even further and to lose weight, and he wasn't eating. Now, these are all consistent with adrenal failure. So on the 10th of April, because he hadn't been eating and he was in bed, we said, "Look, have a meal. What do you want?" "Oh, I like fish, peas and chips." So my wife gave that to him. He ate it and he vomited it all back up. I said, "Right, Dan, we've got to take him back to the doctors tomorrow," because remember, vomiting was one of the symptoms that caused the hospital admission 4 months earlier. So now he's got it again and he's got the weight loss. So the next day, both Diane and I took him to see a GP. This GP then, Dr. Mike Williams, he looked at the medical records and he was aware that Addison's disease was suspected. So he knew Addison's was suspected, that the ACTH test had been ordered but not done.
Yeah.
The child's now vomiting, losing weight, been ill for 11 days, which are all symptoms of Addison's disease.
Yeah.
And he tells my wife and I, "I'll prescribe diurolite for the vomiting, and I'll refer Robbie immediately back to the paediatrician." He didn't tell us that Robbie was suspected of Addison's and his life was in danger. And he sent him home. So we're not at all on notice that if he deteriorates, he could die. But Robert became so weak in the house that he couldn't walk or stand up unaided. So on Sunday the 15th of April, which was the Easter holiday, I phoned the health centre for a home visit. Now, the 4th doctor refused to come to the house. What he said is, "I want you to bring him down to the community hospital," which was 1.5 miles down the road. I had no problem with that, because I'd rather have done that and have him seen than not. I had to carry the child from the bedroom into my car. I had to carry him from my car into the consultation room. And I had to carry him out of the consultation room. What I didn't know was this doctor, Dr. Bollard, had actually received one of the letters from the paediatrician about the suspicion of Addison's disease. He later said that he couldn't recall that that was the case. But what he said was, "I think the child's got glandular fever." And glandular fever is a viral illness. But he prescribed penicillin, which is an adverse condition, an adverse drug to give to somebody with a viral illness. Now, you've got to remember, Mr. McEvoy, I didn't know all this at the time. All I know is he said it was glandular fever. He prescribed the medication and I gave it as prescribed. But what he did say was, bring him down for blood tests on the Tuesday, which was the Tuesday after the Easter Monday. So I carried Robbie, as I said, back to the car. He come home. He continued to deteriorate again. He started vomiting froth. So we phoned the GP again on the Monday, and another GP came out. So this was now the 5th GP to see him. He came to the house, and Robert was complaining of being hot and cold. But what we didn't know was he was losing his blood pressure.
Right, okay.
right? And he was irritable, but he wanted a cover over him. So as the doctor walked into our front room, Robbie was lying on the couch. And I said, "Oh, doctor, he's not feeling well, there's a bit of a temperature." He grabbed the duvet, ripped it off him and threw it over towards my wife, who was sitting on a chair opposite. You don't cover a child with a temperature. And I said, "But we were only doing what he was asking us to do to try and make him comfortable." Anyway, he examined Robbie.
Yeah.
His attitude changed a little bit because you could see obviously he'd been ill now for 2 weeks. He said, "I'm going to do a blood sugar test." He goes to his car, comes back, he said, "Oh, it's out of date. I can't give the blood sugar test." Now, Robert had dangerously low blood sugar when he was admitted 4 months earlier.
Right, yeah.
And the next day, his blood sugar was under 1 when he died. So this is only a day before. So he doesn't do the test. He doesn't go to the health centre to get proper tests or in-date tests to do it. He then says, I said, "Well, what about the blood test tomorrow? It's difficult. Oh, don't bring him tomorrow now. That's Easter Tuesday. Bring him on the Wednesday." So he wrote out some slips, as the previous doctors had done, and said, "Bring him Wednesday. But if he deteriorates or vomits, if you phone, we'll have him admitted to hospital." Because I'd requested and my wife for him to go in as a safety precaution. So he left. The next day, Robert was upstairs in his bed and he asked his mother to help him to go to the toilet. So as she was holding him and walking through to the bathroom, he collapsed and fainted through her arms and was unconscious. She screamed. I ran upstairs and Robbie was on the floor, my wife cradling his head. His eyes were closed, and I just said, "Right, I'll get the doctor." So I ran downstairs because there was nothing really I thought I could have done. Left him with the helmet downstairs, phoned the health centre. I told him my 10-year-old son Robbie has fainted. Is he still unconscious? I said, "I don't know. He's upstairs with his mum. I need a doctor straight away." Well, shortly after that, a doctor came, by which time Robbie had gained consciousness and said to his mother, "I can't see you, Mommy, I can't see you." "Oh, I can see you now." And his little pupils were fully dilated and his lips were blue. What we now know is he was dying.
Right.
So the GP examines him and says there's nothing wrong with him. And I say, "There is something wrong, but it's not seriously wrong. There's no need for him to go into hospital." And I said, "But my wife and I, we'd rather him go." "No, as far as I'm concerned, change the medication to this medication, prescribed and left him." So I wasn't really happy, and God, I only now wished I just put him in the car and took him to the hospital, right? But I didn't. But I did phone the hospital. I told the hospital, the nurse in the hospital, the story, how he'd been unwell there, how he'd been in hospital 4 months earlier. He'd seen all these doctors over this period of time, all the symptoms that he had. He still got dilated pupils and blue lips. And she said, "But if the doctor's just seen him, Mr. Powell, he can't be seriously ill. You've got to trust the doctor. If you come to hospital, you have to go to the accident emergency and you'll have to wait down there. If you're worried, don't get the doctor out again." So we left Robbie for a little bit of time. Next minute, he was complaining of abdominal pain. So I said, "That's it, Dan." I said, "I'm going to get her back out." So I phoned the health centre again, and this woman doctor came out again. So this was the third time she'd seen Robbie. She'd seen him on the 6th. She'd seen him earlier that day, and she'd seen him, and she'd come back now to see him for the third time. She still argued there was nothing wrong with him. I told her, I phoned the hospital, and they said to trust you. Look at the state of my wife. We're really worried about this child. Oh, to put your wife's mind at rest, we'll send him in. So I immediately went upstairs. I wrapped Robbie in his duvet, come back downstairs. The doctor was writing a referral letter because the nurse had told me I can't come to the ward unless they provide me with a referral letter. So I was standing right there. The doctor was standing where Alex is there. And I said, "Have you ordered an ambulance?" She put the referral letter in an envelope and threw it at me across the breakfast bench. I said, "Take him by car." She said, "No, take him by car." So she stormed out of the house, obviously in a bad mood that I'd called her. The hospital is 12 miles from where we live. It's approximately half an hour. I got down to the hospital as quickly as I could. When we got there and lay him on the bed, there was panic. I was asked how long he's been like this, and I said, well, the doctor said there's nothing wrong with him. Did she know? Are you the parents I spoke to earlier? I said, yes. With that, Robert, Diane nearly faints with shock. So she's taken out of the room. And I looked down at Robbie, and his eyes are fixed in the back of his head. His mouth is wide open, and he stopped breathing. I was told to leave the room. And then shortly after that, he was taken to intensive care. And then we were told that it could be encephalitis or a brain tumour, when in fact the scan was negative. We now know that the doctor that was on duty, the paediatrician, was one of the ones that suspected Addison's. Robert had every symptom on that day than he did 4 months earlier when Addison's was suspected, yet he didn't mention Addison's at all to us and told us it could be encephalitis or a brain tumour, when in fact the scan eliminated those diagnoses.
I'm listening to this, Will, and it's quite mind-blowing, really. And as a parent myself, it's extremely emotional to just listen to you. So I can barely understand, barely comprehend how you must feel, how your wife must feel, how the whole family must have felt. So Robbie passed away shortly afterwards.
We were told shortly after that, because the paediatrician I spoke to, who said it could be encephalitis or brain tumour, when I said there's a hope, he was quite abrupt. He said, of course there's hope, we wouldn't be trying if there wasn't any hope. Now what had happened was, I thought Robbie was dead. I thought Robbie was going to die. I couldn't tell my wife because I didn't want to tell her what I had seen. So when my brother and my father-in-law came down to the hospital, I took them to one side. I said, look, I think Robbie's going to die. And they've agreed that they've given testimony to that effect. But we didn't tell the woman. Then we were subsequently told he had died. And we were allowed to see him, and he turned a golden yellow colour.
So what we have all that time ago is some shocking incompetence. Robbie was let down, you were all let down. And what I find most shocking now, over 30 years later, is to be sat with you and to know that you've never received justice, you've never received closure, you've been unable to find peace, because instead of the medical professionals holding their hands up and admitting their negligence more than anything else, they began a whole series of cover-ups. Can you explain what then happened? So Robbie passed away, you made a complaint. What then happened?
Well, I think any parent would think that something had gone drastically wrong. And that's what we thought. But we'd no idea what it could have been.
So at that point, they still hadn't told you about
Addison's. They hadn't told me it had been suspected. They hadn't told me they had all the symptoms of it again. And they hadn't told me that there was even a suspicion he died of it. No, he turned a golden yellow colour. That's the pigmentation.
Can I just stop you there? So this is important as well, because we're looking at this in a political sense from a Welsh National Party perspective. If we skip to the very end, to the High Courts, I think we can go back to what happened in terms of the cover-up. What people watching this and listening to this will find most incredible is that at the very end of that legal process, you were unable to get any compensation or any justice.
But can I just say that the compensation, we never even thought, we didn't care. To be honest, but let me say this, and I think it's important though. The statutory payment, if I could have proved negligence, and the negligence that caused Robbie's death, was £3,500, and the funeral cost. So it's never ever been about any compensation or money.
But I also know that you turned down a substantial amount of money to be quiet. They wanted to pay you off and be quiet, and you refused that, didn't you?
They wanted to settle out the court.
So how much money did you turn down?
Well, it was estimated at over £300,000.
Okay, so-
That was a minimal amount for Robbie's death.
Yeah.
The rest was psychological
Yeah.
damage caused to my wife and psychological damage caused to me, and by
Yeah.
loss of earnings. It's
Yeah.
important that people know that. So it was a massive amount of money,
Yeah.
but we refused to settle.
Yeah, I think that says everything, really. The fact that you were offered 300,000 to settle and be quiet, and justice was more important to you.
Of course,
So-
but can I
so-
just say this though?
yeah.
At that time, it was 6 years after Robbie's death.
Yeah.
I hadn't worked for those 6 years.
Yeah.
We were living on benefits.
Yeah.
I'd cashed in and sold everything I had to pay £34,000 in legal costs
Yeah.
at 1992 Welsh Office Appeal, and I'd remortgaged my home. So we were pretty poor at that particular time, living on benefits, and almost could have lost our home.
Yeah.
But that wasn't important. What was important was justice for Robbie, the truth, irrespective of what else it would cost us financially.
So at the end of the High Court process, what was in law was that it's the duty to candour, isn't it? So what I think what people will find shocking is that after going through the whole process, right at the end of it there in the High Court, there was a ruling that professionals had no duty to tell you the truth.
They'd no legal obligation to tell me the truth, off from refraining from falsifying Robbie's records.
Yeah, okay.
And any damage that had been caused to me wasn't actionable.
Yeah, I think people watching this will be absolutely staggered and shocked that in law there is no duty to tell the truth. And I think one of the things that you've been fighting for over the years is Robbie's Law, where there is a legal duty on professionals to tell the truth, and be open with parents. And I think most people watching this would automatically assume that it exists, and it doesn't, does it?
Well, it doesn't. Well, the battling I did in the exposure turned round that we've had there is a legal duty of candour in England, but it's on the organisation, not the individual.
Yeah.
So as at the moment, doctors still in the same position.
Yeah.
There's no legal obligation, and what people need to understand is we can't trust the GMC to regulate the medical profession. They actually threw Robbie's case out, and yet they knew there was 35 criminal charges set out against them.
Yeah. So when you went through the process on the complaints, it was clear that things were covered up. So there was a police investigation, and talk us through how did they decide that first of all nobody's ever been prosecuted for this.
No.
But how did the police decide that there were 35 criminal things to answer, possible criminal things to answer? How did that come out?
Well, briefly, I made a formal complaint under the NHS. There was a cover-up by the Medical Services Committee in December 1990.
Yeah.
I appealed to the Welsh office. It cost me 34k legal expenses. The appeal collapsed because it was alleged improprieties within the Welsh office, where Robert's medical records went missing and were altered again.
Yeah, so that's a really important point. So your son's medical records, what were altered?
They were altered. Documents that could only have come from the respondent GPs had been added during the adjournment of the Welsh Office Appeal. These documents were not there, nor were they copied to me previously. So they've been put in during the adjournment. So to negate that, the Welsh Office then said they never received the original records, so therefore they were not responsible, when in fact they had.
But there was an officer who did an investigation, and he gave you his investigation, didn't he?
He gave me his brief for the prosecution, which is over 500 pages, and he gave that to me before he died.
Yeah.
He was absolutely appalled by the fact that these doctors had evaded criminal prosecution.
So which officer was that?
It was DCI Poole.
DCI Poole.
A real decent man.
So what did DCI Poole find out? And what charges did he think should have been brought?
Well, there was 35 charges set out against 5 GPs that saw Robbie, and also their secretary. And there was a forged referral letter. There was sufficient evidence to prosecute for forgery and perverting the course of justice regarding a referral letter. That was against Dr. Williams and his secretary, Mrs. Sims. Both of them are now deceased. And also there was enough evidence to charge Dr. Nicola Flower, the doctor that saw Robbie on the last day, for falsifying her medical notes and also for perverting the course of justice.
But they were never charged.
They weren't charged because of the passage of time. There was 3 reasons. They claimed it was an abusive process. The CPS claimed that the passage of time was an abusive process. That the police and the CPS in Wales had failed to recognise the evidence that was put on a plate to them.
Yeah.
And also the police had written a letter to the doctors giving them what the First Minister said was immunity from prosecution.
Yeah.
So those 3 reasons were used not to prosecute.
Well, when we spoke previously, and the Welsh National Party has agreed to support the call for Robbie's Law. Well, what I find frustrating having been in politics, I was elected as a Plaid Cymru NS, as you know, and it was actually Plaid's policy to make sure that Robbie's Law went through, and it was never followed up on. So that's been really disappointing. In terms of going forward, what would you like to see happen?
Well, I think there should be an individual legal duty of candour.
Absolutely.
It was Robbie's death and our sacrifice that brought it into the public domain.
Yeah.
Without so, I don't think it'd be debated to this day.
Yeah.
And I must say this, O'Neill.
Yeah.
The government denied that the judgment meant that they didn't have to tell the truth. So if they were denying it with the judgment, it's pretty obvious it's something they would never have discussed.
I think it's clear to me that, and everyone probably watching this, that we need to change the law as soon as we possibly can. The former First Minister, the late Roger Morgan, promised you a public inquiry when he was in opposition.
That's correct.
Then when he became First Minister, changed his mind.
He changed his mind, then he was persuaded to reconsider it. He sat on it for 9 years, his full term, and then he left there saying, I'm minded to have a public inquiry, but I'm now going to leave it to Carwyn Jones, who had no obligation to me.
So what kind of inquiry did Carwyn Jones initiate?
Well, it was a paper inquiry that ended up not speaking to anybody involved in the care of Robbie, nobody involved in the cover-up. I was interviewed and interrogated by this barrister who just happened to be the barrister that was Carwyn Jones' junior counsel when he was Counsel General. So there was a close association between the two of them.
So you were questioned 5 times by the inquiry. So you were made to feel as if the inquiry was into you?
Well, it was like an investigation to me. This wasn't about me.
So I've read documents where you're called obsessed.
Yes.
And I'm reading this stuff, and Will, I just can't believe it. It's like, of course every father would be obsessed. Every father until they got justice for their son. But in terms of the report that Carwyn Jones initiated, they didn't even speak to the doctors. That's worth repeating.
Well, there was no investigation. It was a paper inquiry. Yeah. It was criticised straight away. We tried to expand it.
So what happened to the conclusions? So there was an inquiry, and what did Carwyn Jones then do with that inquiry?
He then redacted 18 sections of that report.
Right. Okay.
Blanked them out.
So the First Minister initiated an inquiry, and then the doctors are not even questioned. You're questioned 5 times. And the conclusions, they blank out 18.
Yeah. 18 and it's associated to the barrister that did it. So I think that takes away the independence of that inquiry. I'm sorry, I don't think it's independent.
Yeah.
When it's a colleague or an associate.
So you're still calling, which I support actually, a call for a public inquiry.
There should be a public inquiry.
Yeah.
But if not a public inquiry, there now needs to be an independent inquiry by an independent barrister who's not associated with either the Westminster or the Welsh Government.
But what really concerns me about your case is that this kind of stuff, you would think is unbelievable, but it's the way Wales works. And
there's lots of cases in Wales, and I'll speak up for them as well. There's too many, beg your pardon, to mention. But there's lots of cases. This is a pattern. I've helped people in England, Scotland, everywhere.
Yeah.
The NHS, there's a culture of cover-up. They'd rather lie, deny, than actually falsify medical records and deny that anything's gone wrong.
I'm dealing with a lot of cases with children's services, for example, with kids taken into care, where allegations are fabricated, for example.
Yes.
Nothing is ever done about it. There's no justice. So what we've been talking about, because this is common. I mean, it's the way Wales works. There's wrongdoing. It's not addressed. It's covered up. Those that have done the wrongdoing are never held to account. And what we want to do in Wales is change that culture. So we spoke about a complaints regulator. How do you think that could improve things for everybody else?
Well, Robbie's case initiated an inquiry by the Health Select Committee back in 1998,
Right.
1999.
Yeah.
And one of my submissions was that we needed an independent body
Yeah.
set up, now whether you call it a regulator or an independent body, but that they can, people like myself can go there when we're dissatisfied with the procedures.
Yeah.
And the Ombudsman has been severely criticised for many, many years, decades in fact, and they're still being criticised now. However, both the Welsh Ombudsman and the English Ombudsman are both supporting a public inquiry into Robbie's case, and they know that their offices will also be under scrutiny if this happens.
Yeah. How important is it that we have an independent regulator then? So,
Well, it's crucial,
Yeah.
because unless that happens, everybody's going to be in the same boat as I have after 30 years.
Yeah.
But what you have to remember about the actual duty of candour in England is it's organisational.
organisational, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That means that the employer, the organisation, the trust, has a legal duty to inform the family of bereaved children or bereaved adults the truth about the death.
Yeah.
But if the doctor doesn't tell the employer,
Yeah, of course.
the employer cannot then tell the family.
Yeah.
And if it comes to light subsequently
Yeah.
that the doctor has not told the employer, the CQC cannot take action against the employer because they didn't know. And lo and behold, the doctor has to go back to the GMC who actually covered up in Robbie's case. So it doesn't make any difference whatsoever.
How did the GMC cover up then? Or did they just not do their duty?
Well, they told me that they were waiting for the police investigation before
Yeah.
doing anything. DCI Pool had put them on notice of a complaint. DCI Pool informed them of all the charges against these doctors, which were very serious,
Yeah.
about dishonesty and falsification of records and their gross negligence. You have to remember, Mr. McEvoy, that 2 experts have given evidence in reports that 5 doctors have been grossly negligent and a substantial cause of Robbie's death. That is the criteria for manslaughter, for gross negligent manslaughter. So at the end of the day, the GMC was fully aware.
Yeah.
Now, had the police referred the matter to the GMC, the time limit that they had, which was introduced in November 2002, could not have been applied. But the DCI, or DCI Pool, who actually said to me he would refer it to the GMC, was excluded from the meeting. So when the police and the CPS went there in March of 2003, they decided not to make the referral, and they said that I should make the complaint. Now they knew at that time there was a 5-year time limit. They knew at that time the 5-year time limit could be engaged. No one told me.
In terms of, so there was a preventable tragedy. Robbie was ill. The illness had been identified. It wasn't it wasn't acted upon. So there's a huge.
There's a catalogue of errors. There's a catalogue of medical errors, and rather be honest, there's a conspiracy to cover up the child's death.
So as a dad, you just wanted, and you know, your wife, mum, and your family just wanted to be told the truth. What's been the cost to you? What's been the personal cost? How's it affected your family?
Well, it's destroyed our family lives. It's destroyed the relationship between myself and my other sons. It's a bit difficult to put into words. But our son Ian, 41, passed away last year. We found him deceased in his flat. He was a recovering alcoholic, and the whole lot devastated his life. His older brother was 14. It's devastated his life. It's caused damage between his relationship and mine as well. It's just destroyed our life. We live, and I do my best to continue, as does my wife. But it isn't easy when you've lost 2 of your children through no fault of your own, and that the authorities just don't care less about it.
I said to you before I came up that I'd like to see some of the paperwork and even go in the front room. I mean, it's just just the whole room is just full of files. It's all filed away, but there's such an amount of evidence there, so many documents, but you're still 30 years later without resolution.
Well, I'm 67, Mr. McEvoy, and I don't know how long I've got left. And to be quite honest, the way things are going, I don't think I'll see justice before I leave this world. That's how I feel at the minute. I've been lied to by so many others. I've been failed with the police, the CPS, the NHS, the Welsh office, the Welsh government. Everybody that I've been to, I've exposed them for failures, and not one person has been made accountable. And it's interesting to note that Dyfed-Powys Police, who looked at this for 6 years, between 1994 and 2000, they actually retained these doctors under investigation as police surgeons. And they claimed for 6 years there was no evidence, yet we gave them the same evidence that was relied upon to set out 35 charges. If I can finish, if you don't mind. 2 of those police officers, there was an investigation when DCI Powell came to Wales and investigated. 2 senior officers at Dyfed-Powys Police were actually issued with discipline notices. An inquiry was set up to investigate them, and yet senior command at Dyfed-Powys Police allowed them to retire, which meant they didn't have to participate in the investigation that was set up to look into their misconduct.
As I said, I would say it's shocking, but it's not. It's the norm. It's the way things work in Wales.
But institutional incompetent against Dyfed-Powys Police, I don't think that's a fair finding. There was about 3, maybe 5 officers involved, and I don't think that's an institutionally competent police force. And I think they just used a word not to identify individuals. And it's interesting to note, Neil, that even in Somerset, Constabulary, who found them institutionally incompetent, claimed that no complaints had been recorded against any police officer. And that was true. But I had complained about a deputy chief constable. I had formally complained as well against the chief constable, but both of them were not recorded.
Right.
They were suppressed. And even in Somerset knew that. So to say that there was no complaint recorded was correct, but what they didn't say was I'd made 2 formal complaints and they were shelved. Which I think there's a big difference.
When I first got to hear about your case, I started reading up on it, and the more I've read, just the more appalled I've been, really. And the only promise I can make, and the only promise we can make as a political party, really, is to make sure that we first of all make as much noise as possible on your and your family's behalf, and campaign for the change in the law, and campaign for a full inquiry.
That would be fantastic.
I really wish we were decision makers. We're not, but we can certainly try and hold those decision makers.
It has to be done for the better of Wales, so this is a problem, and
You're not alone, Will. I
know I'm not alone.
It's injustice after injustice. It's cover up after cover up, and there's this whole. I think Wales is one of the most corrupt countries in the world.
I'd have to agree with you. To be honest, I'd have to agree, but there are lots of people who have suffered as we have, right? And there's been many NHS cover-ups. But there isn't a case in Wales or this country, I don't think, where the documentary evidence is there and it's irrefutable. And that's one reason I think they're refusing me an inquiry, because I've got all the documents.
Doesn't surprise me.
And that then to me is a threat to them, because they won't be able to cover it up if somebody independent looks at it.
Well, as I said, Will, we've as a party we've discussed it. We agree. We're totally in favour of Robbie's Law. We want to campaign for an inquiry. I don't know whether that can give you any comfort. Really, I don't know. But what we want to do is expose injustice in Wales and do something about it. So, thank you for talking to me today.
Thank you.
I don't think I can explain how difficult it must be for you to do so. And
can I just say
go
one
over
thing?
Things time and time again.
You mentioned that they've called me obsessed. Well, they called me a liar.
Yeah.
They've called me a streetwise alley cat.
Yeah.
They've said I was loud. They said I was aggressive.
Yeah.
They said I was a caveman.
Yeah.
Now, this is a bereaved father that all I've ever... And if I can show you my correspondence, go back to 1990, and I'm not rude. I state the facts. I challenge,
Yeah.
because it was my right to challenge. But there's no way that I am the person that they said that I was. And that's simply to assassinate my character.
Yeah.
And you know all about that, Neil.
Yeah, it's the way
It's
things
the way
operate.
they do it.
It's the way they do it. And what I would say is that, as far as I'm concerned, you're a dad who's seeking justice for his son and family, and that's good enough for me.
But I promised Robbie on his deathbed that I would find out what went wrong.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I haven't fulfilled that as yet.
Yeah.
I just want change. I mean, I want change. I think a doctor should be under a legal obligation to tell the truth. I mean, we trust them with their children's lives. We trust them with their own lives.
Yeah,
We trust them with their loved ones' lives.